Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first ICLEI webinar on Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues, taking place today, Wednesday, 31st February at 10 and 16 o'clock Central European Standard Time. My name is Jisun Hwang, Senior Climate Advocacy and Policy Officer at ICLEI World Secretariat, and I will be one of the panelists of today's webinar, and I will also double as the facilitator of today's webinar. And on behalf of ICLEI, I would like to extend my heartfelt welcome to all of you. And before we start the webinar, let me give you a brief introduction on the technical aspects of today's webinar. First of all, you are automatically in the muted mode, and I would like to kindly ask you to stay muted till the end of all the presentations. Secondly, there is an option for you to type in your questions during any time of this webinar. Just simply go to the questions box of the webinar pane, and then you can type in your questions. Last but not least, this webinar is being recorded, and in keeping with the principles of openness and transparency, this webinar recording will then be distributed to all the participants and registrants of today's webinar. Now, with that technical introduction, let me introduce my fellow panelist, Mr. Yunus Arikan. He is the head of Global Policy and Advocacy at ICLEI World Secretariat. He is also the local governments and municipal authorities constituency focal point to the UNFCCC. Now, with that, let us start our webinar. Today's webinar will be consisting of these three elements. First of all, I will be presenting the overview, mandates, and context of what we call the Talanoa Dialogue, which used to be called the Facilitative Dialogue 2018. And secondly, I will give you a presentation on the summary of what was presented by Ambassador Khan at a recent webinar on the guidance for the Talanoa dialogues coming from the COP23 presidency. And after that, Mr. Yunus Arikan will then present the Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues initiative. First of all, let us start with the overview, mandates, and context of the Talanoa dialogue. The Talanoa Dialogue, which used to be called the Facilitative Dialogue 2018, was mandated by COP21 that took place in December 2015. In that historic decision document that contains the text of the Paris Agreement is the Decision 1CP21 of the COP, the Conference of the Parties, and in that paragraph 20, in that document's paragraph 20, there is a mandate for the facilitative dialogue that should take place in 2018. And the mandate says the dialogue should have two purposes. One is to take stock of the collective progress towards the goal of the Paris Agreement, and the second element is to inform the preparation of nationally determined contributions, or we now call it NDCs for short. After that development in December 2015, we had subsequently a lot of other developments which opened more opportunities for participation for non-party stakeholders in this process for raising ambition of NDCs. So if we look at what happened at the May sessions in 2017, last year, we had landmark conclusions from SBI 46 under the agenda item of arrangements for intergovernmental meetings, which basically which recommended for the presidency to also hold an open dialogue where parties and non-party stakeholders can all participate, seated at the same table, and then discuss what is most important for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And this outcome actually was prepared, and it actually reflects what was discussed at the mandated event during the May sessions last year of the Stakeholders Engagement Workshop. And ICLEI, on behalf of the LGMA constituency, was also an active participant in this dialogue. And Mr. Yunus Arikan also was actually one of the panelists at the session for that. And after this, at COP23, we came to have the very first open dialogue presided over by the COP23 presidency, where indeed both parties and non-party stakeholders were seated and at one table. And then under the Chatham House rules, we had frank and open and transparent discussions as to what we can do together to achieve the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement, as well as to explore opportunities to further enhance the stakeholder engagement process of the at the UNFCCC. Now, one of the most important outcomes of COP23 is captured in Decision 1 CP23, which has a lot of different elements, but one of the elements that are contained in its annex is the Talanoa dialogue approach that is given by the COP22 and COP23 presidencies, which basically has these elements. The facilitative dialogue is to be now known as the Talanoa dialogue, in keeping with the Pacific style of holding a dialogue in a very inclusive, open, and transparent manner. And it is not to put anyone on the spot, but to share stories and to promote the spirit of cooperation. And guided by this spirit of Talanoa, the 2018 Talanoa dialogue will have two different phases. The first one is the preparatory phase that has been launched at COP23 to start from January this year, and it will go all the way to COP24. And at COP24 in December this year, the political phase will be started, where ministers and heads of state and ministers will then deliberate upon what has been prepared during the preparatory phase. And I would like to draw your attention to the first picture of the preparatory phase, which is a diagram that is contained in the document Decision 1 CP23. And we are supposed to answer three key questions of where are we, where do we want to go, and how do we get there? In terms of where we are in our ambition contained in current NDCs, and what we can do as parties and non-party stakeholders together to achieve the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement, and to formulate a roadmap as to how do we actually get there. And in doing so, what is most notable is that it is recommended that presidencies invited both parties and non-party stakeholders to hold local, national, and regional discussions as to how to actually address these three key questions. And what ICLEI and its partners launched under the Citizen Regions Dialogues is part of this answering this call of action, and Yunus will then present it in more details. And so the Talanoa dialogue will have then these two processes that will then culminate at COP24 to be discussed at the high level. Now, with that, I would like to give you a quick summary of what has been shared by the chief negotiator of the COP23 presidency, Ambassador Khan, at a recent webinar held by the WRI on 15th February. And as you can see, you can also find the source of this video recording at this YouTube address. So basically, Ambassador Khan shared the vision for the Talanoa dialogue session that will be held during the May sessions this year in conjunction with the 2018 Bonn conference. The structure of the Talanoa dialogue will be as follows. So it will have the opening plenary presided over by both the COP23 presidency and the COP24 incoming presidency. And then the session will be held in 3 different parallel sessions addressing each of the 3 questions. Where are we? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? And the summaries of these parallel sessions will then be reported to the closing plenary. And the entire summary of this Talanoa dialogue session during the May sessions will then be posted also on the website that has been launched by the UNFCCC Secretariat, so that anybody can see what happened during the May sessions at the Talanoa dialogue. The parallel sessions will consist of 6 different groups led by 6 Fijian moderators. And each of these 6 groups will have 35 people in it. So each table, there will be 35 people, 6 different tables per parallel session. 30 will be coming from parties, national governments, and 5 will be then coming from non-party stakeholders. And therefore, it makes, and Ambassador Khan also mentioned that you don't have to be present at all 3 parallel groups. So it means if each of the non-party stakeholders can take part in any one of those 3 parallel sessions, it makes the total number that can be allocated to the non-party stakeholder segment to 90 representatives. So 5 people, 6 groups, that makes 30, and 3 different questions. So that will be 90 people in total. And Ambassador Khan goes on to say that when you attend the Talanoa session during the May sessions as a representative of your organization, of a non-party stakeholder, you're supposed to share 2 stories. One, a positive story, and the other one on a challenging story. And you're supposed to spend time to carefully select, to carefully deliberate on what story would then needs to be shared, because this will then be captured as a summary and will be delivered to the ministers and heads of states at COP24. So you are advised to spend a lot of time on thinking about and exploring which stories that you would most like to share in that group. As I mentioned, the opening plenary will be presided by both of the presidencies, and the parallel session summaries will then be also prepared to be reported at the closing plenary. And as I mentioned, the whole summary of the entire session will be posted online so that everybody can follow the Talanoa dialogue outcomes at May sessions. And this will then be relayed to ministers and other heads of states who will be coming to COP24 for the high-level Talanoa dialogue. So this is not an opportunity to be missed, as Ambassador Khan emphasized, and indeed this is quite an important opportunity for the entire non-party stakeholders community to have their voices heard and to also have their impacts felt. Now, with that summary of what has been shared by Ambassador Khan, I would like to turn to Yunus now to give further updates on the cities and regions Talanoa dialogues. Yunus, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jisun, both for the summary capturing of the whole concepts and giving me the floor to intervene to the next steps. I'm just starting the presentation. As Jisun mentioned, this is a process under the Paris Agreement. So the first thing that we should ask to ourselves is why? Why do we organize cities and regions Talanoa dialogues? There are 4 main answers for that. The first one is that the Paris Agreement has a new way of approach to global climate action. It is different than UNFCCC, the text of the UNFCCC adopted in '92, and it's even different than the Kyoto Protocol. There are a number of changes, and for us, the most relevant two points is that in the preamble of Paris Agreement, there is a very significant paragraph. It says recognition of the engagement of all levels of government, which means from now on, Paris Agreement is not just an responsibility of the national governments, but all levels of governments have a role, and especially they have an important role in the whole process. That means whatever is in terms of delivering the Paris Agreement, we should contribute, and we should also come up with our own proposals as a constituency. The second one is that we are aware the design of the UN climate process, which is a legacy of the Agenda 21 or the Earth Summit, which is in fact based on a very key principle: common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capacities. In practice, we have some countries who had a more role and historic responsibilities, and some have a different way of contribution, and this was for a long time designed as Annex 1, non-Annex 1, or Annex 2, so there were certain groups of countries. But in the Paris Agreement, there is no such list, but even more than that, this principle is also further detailed with the sentence which says, in the light of national circumstances. And we also see the difference in the compliance regime of the Paris Agreement is slightly different than the Kyoto Protocol, which gives much more responsibility and implementation initiatives to the national processes. Therefore, in the Paris era, the climate conferences, the COPs will be of course important. The decisions are there, of course, will provide guidance, and it will be strengthening the global momentum, but the real action will be at home at the national level. The real change has to come from bottom up, and therefore our work at the local and regional level should also strengthen and much more engage in the national processes. The second, the COP23 decision, as Jisun summarized, it was at the beginning only one event at Katowice in COP. But over these weeks and months and years almost of negotiations, or also our support as constituency of local and regional governments, we asked this to be a process. We asked this to be more than a meeting, and especially opening the doors for active engagement at numerous levels, and we are very happy after all these efforts. The final design opens the door local, national, and regional discussions, which is the Tolono dialogue can happen any place in the world if there is a interested community or responsible government on that. And of course, the decision also allows non-party stakeholders to provide submissions so that we have the chance to share our views. Therefore, we also have another mandate and responsibility. The third is that on the way to COP and at COP, as we continuing our advocacy of the global climate process as the local and local governments constituency, we have convened a climate summit, which is regularly held, and this year in COP in Bonn, it was even more stronger with local and regional coalitions. And we have adopted Bonn-Fiji commitment, and in this Bonn-Fiji commitment, we have asked for a spatial element that this facilitative dialogue should be opened, and it should be developed in consultation with local and regional governments. Therefore, in this sense, we asked for our engagement. The parties, especially COP presidency, have heard us. They opened these opportunities, they opened the doors for us, and now it's time for us to come into this door with appropriate mechanisms, with appropriate engagement. Therefore, we don't have the luxury, but in fact, it is something that we have been asking for, and we should deliver what we have been committing to. Therefore, it's an opportunity that we should use. And one last point, of course, after COP, we didn't stop. There was a One Planet Summit, and in that summit, there was also a number of announcements, and one of them was from the Global Climate, the Global Covenant of Mayors. It was a call for action on NDC vertical integration, which is strongly related to what we are discussing. So these are the main reasons why we should be proactively coming up to the Talanoa dialogues, and that was the logic. Again, in addition to this background or justification, we should also ask to ourselves then, okay, what are we doing, or why we are engaging, or what we want to achieve? We can clarify it in three main, let's say, subject lines. First of all, these questions that you have heard from the presidency, or it's also a question that everybody has a different perspective of the Paris Agreement. So this Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues is for us the opportunity to translate all these global conclusions and the decisions to our realities, to our priorities, that local and regional governments have a much more specific understanding, have a much more specific expectation, and have much more specific contribution. Of course, other major groups, other stakeholders, farmers, business group, environmental group, they will all have their own inputs, but we have to have a specific focus on our role and our expectations. Second, as we said, if now Paris Agreement is a regime that is to be implemented at all levels, this is the first opportunity for us to demonstrate a good multi-level governance, a good practice of how we come up with the collective discussions. And in that sense, that is also for us a test bed. That's also for us an opportunity. And of course, our agenda at the local level and regional level is not limited to Paris Agreement. And we know the whole world, be it SDGs, be it the new urban agenda, has to have a much stronger connection. And that's an opportunity for us to bring all these processes together. And the last part, let's be aware, this nationally determined contributions, in fact, was a bit unique, because when they were designed as an initially determined contributions, there were no Paris Agreement. So these visions, these new elements, these new ways of work are not reflected in NDCs. So NDCs as of today are designed in the world of a pre-Paris Agreement. And of course, it is official on the table, and this will be implemented. But therefore, this opportunity, Talanoa Dialogue, is for us the first opportunity to bring the Paris Agreement into practice, to bring Paris Agreement to a real discussion, and then look back what we have been committed, or what national governments have committed, with the new realities after 3 years of Paris Agreement, whether is it realistic, or was it where it can be strengthened, where it can be upgraded or updated, or even strengthened and enhanced. So in that sense, the Talanoa Dialogues, and especially the ones that we would like to host, is bringing Paris Agreement home to our constituencies, to our jurisdictions. And of course, the difference of anything else is that it has to be developed with the national government. So it should be a process that has to be developed together. So how we would like to run this process? Our vision is that ICLEI, as Local Governments for Sustainability, as the long-lasting member of this constituency of local governments and municipal authorities constituency, and in this focal point, we are volunteering to facilitate this process pursuant to our role as focal point, and on behalf of our global coalition, which is the Global Task Force. We will have special partners, especially UN Habitat and the Global Covenant of Mayors. It's more important to mention that the new executive director of the UN Habitat, Maimuna Sherif, has already been active in the climate agenda. She was in Marrakesh meetings, and she was at pre-COP in Fiji, in Suva. Therefore, she's also very passionate and personally connected to this. So that's a huge opportunity that we should squeeze in, and then we'll touch upon it later on. Of course, we have received, after all these efforts over the past weeks, a strong support with UN Climate Change Secretariat and the Fijian COP23 presidency. So they're eager to hear our preparations, to be engaged, to scale up as appropriate as possible, and we have received such a great support from their support to our work. And who would run these dialogues? In fact, it is our members, which is the LGMA members, our partners of the LGMA constituency, some of the initiatives that we are engaged as LGMA members, and of course, in some cases, our direct members, which is cities and regions themselves, can step up and convene a process. And you would see probably another example in that sense from Tokyo, who was one of the first cities who have announced their interest to convene such a dialogue. And what has happened over the past years that weeks is that we have launched this process at the World Urban Forum in Kuala Lumpur, and it was a very specific message because we wanted the urban community, not necessarily those participating in all these COPs, or not necessarily only those who are involved in climate agenda, but the whole urban community should be aware of this opportunity, because this is a golden chance for us to deliver the new urban agenda, to strengthen the multi-level governance, and especially to include ministers of urbanization, or whichever appropriate, because there are different ministries in each countries, because we are also aware that those ministries were also not too much aware of what is their national contribution, because it's mainly a process led by the climate change process, climate ministries, and it may be the case that they may not have been too much involved in the process. So how we want to run these things. Of course, these are our recommendations as ICLEI. It doesn't have to be fully implemented, and each host, each region, each city can have their own styles. But what we would like to recommend is that, first of all, it should be an invitation by the government of the city or region, or the respective network who is supporting this process. And in some cases, it could be an invitation from the national government, as the national government's plans for Talanoa dialogue. And in that sense, let's be realistic, the Talanoa dialogues is a recommendation, and there are countries who may take it very, very aggressively. There may be countries who may be very active, and there may be countries who may not be putting this as a priority. So we cannot judge this. So this is also an open space. Our logic is that any meeting should start with a presentation of the country's NDC by the Ministry of the Climate or Environment, whoever responsible, and then we should also ask for additional inputs from the ministers of urbanization primarily, but also from other line ministries, especially like finance, for example, that they are the ones who are part of the whole process. But we would like to leave it again to the hosts and the partners. And this should continue. So it's not just that, but we should continue to provide inputs, this time from our local and regional governments, or the hosts of these process, which share what is the action at the ground level, what is the contributions of climate action of those hosts and or those partners, so that the national ministries could have a better understanding or have some refreshed information. And of course, after these first dialogues, then we should focus on these 3 questions. We will go through the details as well, and it should be constructive and forward-looking. As Jisun mentioned, this is not a blame game. This is not a pointing finger. And we are also aware political situations at the regional and local level are always something that we should be aware and we should take into account. But we don't want to turn this into a process that will make partners uncomfortable, but rather a constructive process. We suggest to have flexible formats, so depending on the event, which is defined based on the availability of technical and financial resources, and of course the agenda that will be agreed between the national governments and the local and regional governments. We should be expecting to be a diversity of options, a pool of let's say styles. It could be open or closed. We also would like to underline this. Some countries, there may be better outcomes if it is held closed, so we can also be flexible on that. We should be flexible on that. It could be extended from a 2-hour session in one of the big events, or it could be a big major event for full 2 days. So that's also possible. And as I said, logistics is important, availability of participants are important. So these are all options that can be decided by the partners. And these outcomes should also now be communicated to UNFCCC. As Jisun mentioned, there are submission deadlines. In that submissions, there is a certain request from the UNFCCC and the presidency that these should be concise, these should be specific. Therefore, rather than sending a report from every meeting, our tendency or our proposal would be that maybe some of those could be captured as a joint submission on behalf of the LGMA constituency. But if there are very unique, very let's say specified inputs, this could also be considered an individual input. But we are hearing from the UN Climate Change Secretary and the presidency that as much as possible submissions should be a coalition or a collaboration of multiple partners. But of course, in addition to our submission, one key important thing would be the national governments who take part in this dialogue, that they also mention, they also refer to these meetings, they also share that they are happy to have a dialogue with their local and regional governments, that they have learned a lot or they have improved a lot, and that they also share these in their official submissions, because at the end of the day, the UN climate change negotiations are party driven, which means the national governments have the final word to sign and to agree. Therefore, inputs from the parties are, as even in more cases, more relevant in terms of the decision making. We don't want to weigh in that sense, but as long as the parties could also mention, and even some of the proposals can be captured there, this would be our success story as well. Now we will come to this specifics of what should be discussed or how we should discuss this. And again, this translation issue is an important point. So the question, where are we? Where do we want to go? How do we get there? We suggest it could be better simplified or better explained or even detailed. For example, in the case of where we are, we should focus on the delivery of existing NDCs. And in that question, we should be making one more additional step. For example, it's to be more clear, is sustainable urbanization adequately included in NDCs? Because in climate action in some countries, it's only focused to energy, only focused to agriculture, or some countries only focused for transport, for example. Are these reports or these plans, do they really have a relevance to the national urban policy, or are they containing actions in the urban sectors like building, waste, demand side efficiency, renewables, mobility, procurement, biodiversity? And this, we have some source of information, like we have the NDCs and we have an analysis from UN Habitat, so we can check this with this information. And if the answer is yes to these questions, then the second one comes, okay, are these really, the local and regional governments, are they aware of it? Are they really, have they heard about it? Are they part of these plans? And maybe, and this comes that if this is not the case, maybe there are some actions from local government or regional governments that they has never been mentioned in this action plans, but it could be part of it. So that could be a new element, or it could be supplementing the existing ones. So this is the one part of the questions. And the second question, where do we want to go? Okay, we have in most cases, NDCs are 5 or 6 page documents, and it also concludes with a specific reduction targets or emission reduction targets. And the question is that how can we raise these targets, both in the current NDCs and the future one? How can we make use of the existing commitments of local and regional governments? In most cases, they have their independent targets. They have their control over certain sectors. Can we capture these commitments and can we relate to the national ones? How they complement each other? Do they support to each other, or are they adding up to existing ones? So that could be a discussion we could have. And in that sense, again, we have a pool of information from the Carbon Climate Registry. More than 1,000 cities and regions are reporting their information there, or we have commitments on the Global Covenant of Mayors, so we can make use of these information. And of course, the last question, how do we go there? It's simply, what do we do now? Of course, we have seen what can be done. We have seen that some of those things can be done immediately, but it's also clear some of those need additional technical, financial, and policy processes, and it may not be finished at the end of this week, at the end of this year. It may even come further, and especially recalling that there will be second wave of and third wave of NDCs. This should be an ongoing process. Therefore, we should come up with certain action plans this year, towards 2020 and beyond 2020. As we said, we are not at point zero. We have national documents. We have an analysis of those from an urban perspective. We have local and regional governments reporting their actions and commitments. And we also have now a good opportunity that from this March onwards, there will be an update from Cities IPCC conference, which will bring us a bit more reality check on cities engagement in the climate agenda. And we should always be consulting the official Talanoa dialogues homepage of the presidency and the UN Climate Secretariat, and cities and regions homepage should also be the way where we communicate our events, activities, outcomes, photos, documents, whatever you can think about. And these are the last slides. As of today, we are thinking of around 40 countries, and we are expecting to have around 60 or 70 events. And that's also the beauty of this. In one country, we may have more than one event, and we may have more than one partner or partners active in this one country. They could combine their forces in convening one event, or they can have one event following the other. As of today, with all the LGMA inputs so far, we can have the first map here until November. There is a relative clarity on who is hosting these events, where, and in which project or which event is the main vehicle for that. So starting from February onwards, we have a list of options now. Of course, there are still preparations for those details of these events, but more or less we have some clarity on these events, a bit more stronger or solid in terms of technical preparations as possible. And of course, these webinars, our consultations with our partners, will shape these events. And then we have around 20 or 30 more events which are on the pipeline, where our partners are still discussing in terms of the country, in terms of their partners, in terms of their calendars. So we assume over the next couple of weeks we can have more information about these events, and so that we can make a complete list. And obviously this is a work in progress. There were some of those events may be canceled or changed, and we may expect new events to come up, so that it is a work in progress. Until COP24 in Katowice, we have possibilities, but of course submission deadlines on 2nd of April and 29th of October are critical dates, so that the better we convene these events before these deadlines, so that we can provide inputs to these deadlines. Jisun, I think I'm getting closer to my input. So these are the tweet cards that you can find in the Cities and Regions Talanoa dialogues, the quotes from presidency of the COP, Patricia Spinoza, Ambassador Khan, EU Vice President Sefcovic, Maimuna Sherif, UN Executive Director, ICLEI Secretary General, and Mayor of Quito. And we would be happy to have more of those quotes to be spread around the world, so that every leader can also share their views with us. And obviously now this is the time to discuss about multi-level action, and this is the time to make subnational action delivering the global climate goals. So with this, I'd like to conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Yunus, for your presentation and your informative contents regarding the details of the Cities and Regions Talanoa dialogues. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been the end of the presentations, and then I would like to now open the floor for your questions or comments. And I would like to take this opportunity also to invite one of our colleagues, Kanako, because as Yunus mentioned, and it was introduced in our list of events that will be feeding into the Talanoa Dialogues, Cities and Regions Talanoa Dialogues initiative, Tokyo is one of the cities that is participating, and I believe Kanako can provide further details about this. So Kanako, I give you the floor.
Jason, maybe you can unmute her or him. Sorry.
I'm trying.
Maybe Luke can help us from the technical desk, help desk.
Kanako, can you unmute yourself? And at the moment, Kanako actually dropped from the panel.
Maybe it could be some others. Maybe while we wait for her or for him, we could also get
Hello?
more for others. Yeah.
Hello? Is this Kanako?
Can you hear me? Yes, this is Kana.
Yes.
Oh, great. All right, sorry, I just didn't know how to unmute. Okay,
Oh,
so
it's okay.
okay, so thank you very much for the kind introduction. My name is Kana. I'm working at Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and we are holding the international conference, which is called Tokyo Forum for Sustainable Urban Environment this year, May 21st to 23rd. And we are inviting local leaders in Asia and Oceania regions. And the topic will be mainly waste management and air quality management. But we are also focusing on the very specific topic, but we will also address issues to meet Sustainable Development Goals and Paris Agreement in the end of the conference, because we are also inviting the mayor level, and also we also invite the practitioner. So that's why we are trying to cover very specific topic and the global agenda as well. And we are very interested in Talanoa dialogues, but I am not sure our conference is eligible to be cities and regions Talanoa dialogues, because our focus is more very focused topics such as waste management and air quality management, which is very connected to the climate change. But I am not sure, because we are not addressing energies and climate change issues. But I think your advice will be very helpful.
Maybe I can respond, Jisun, to
Yes, go ahead.
Kanako's question. First of all, we are very happy to hear, because Tokyo has always been active in the global agendas and the processes at all levels. So I think it's a question that we could clarify together. We can work after this webinar as well, and we can work on the agenda. We can discuss what options we can develop, whether it is suitable, and we can clarify it. As we said, we should be flexible depending on the conditions and context. One important thing is that, as Jisun mentioned, in Bonn at the COP, there was an open dialogue, and Japanese government was also one of those parties who have stepped up and spoke and referred to their good practice and their interest to work with local and regional government. So I think there are conditions that can be suitable or favorable, and we can work with you to design the most appropriate modality.
Wonderful. That's great news. Thank you very much. But we are very, very happy to be one of the cities and regions Talanoa dialogues, because I think this is a great idea.
Good to hear that.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, any other questions or comments if you would like to provide to the discussion that we have here? You can either raise your hand or you can type in your questions. So far, I see none at the moment. And in the meantime, maybe I could just add on to what Yunus just said in response to the comments that have been provided by Kanako, which is it is important to have a holistic view, in my opinion, meaning that climate change is one of the SDGs. It's SDG 13, but at the same time, climate change also has linkages to each and every sustainable development goal. So in order to have a synergy effect of implementing NDCs of the Paris Agreement, and therefore getting closer to achieving that below 2-degree goal of the Paris Agreement, it is quite essential that the entire sustainable development agenda can be addressed together in a holistic manner. So as Yunus mentioned, I would like to very much second that opinion that the waste management or air quality or any of those other agendas that are quite relevant to sustainable urban development can definitely be one of the stepping stones towards achieving the Paris Agreement goal, and therefore raising the ambition of NDCs. So we are very delighted to have the contributions from the city of Tokyo.
Thank you.
Well, I
have one.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question. And if we officially one of the cities and regions Talanoa dialogue, can we have some presenter or speakers from ICLEI?
At your event?
Yes, is that possible?
Kanako, that's exactly what we would like to discuss with you. You know, we have a Japan office, and we have been frequently visiting Tokyo for a number of projects. Let's discuss, depending on the time and agenda. We would do our best to support your event. And just to recall, these webinars will also be conducted monthly, and we will also share with all the partners a summary of this information, which is captured as like a guidance pack, so that we can help you in terms of what type of agendas you can come up with. We will do our best to support you at Tokyo, and of course a very active member of ICLEI, and we could check who can be available depending on this other agendas. But let's discuss. That's why I'm very eager to work with you and to have Takashi, ICLEI Japan office, and other partners involved, so that we clarify our engagement. And while you are talking, actually, maybe you are still seeing my screen. I'm going through the Japanese NDC, for example. This is, of course, the first thing you have to look at, how your areas of work are involved. And of course, you can see there are so many detailed explanations of so many topics, and I'm sure there will be a lot of entry doors for you and let's recall, Japan, Tokyo has been the city who has implemented the first city level cap and trade program. Energy efficiency, definitely there are a lot of work that would strengthen the Japanese contributions, I think. So I'm sure this is a golden opportunity for you to raise the profile and engagement of Japan, Tokyo, in the Japanese process.
Right, and while we are, go ahead, Kanako.
Oh, no, I just want to say thank you.
Okay, all right. And well, actually, we have one question registered in the question box, which is about the reporting procedures. So how are the outcomes from each dialogue recorded and collected? That's a question that we got from Bernie. And actually, we have a reporting template that we have internally developed, and still it is going through discussions as to how best to improve this. So it is one way of recording or capturing the outcomes of the Talanoa dialogues. But whatever the final format of this reporting template that we might share with our partners for reporting the Talanoa dialogue, it will be the key important features that need to be contained in your submissions to the presidency, is to address these three questions of where we are, where do we want to go, and how do we get there. So each of the Talanoa dialogue sessions will be focusing on these three questions. The Talanoa dialogues themselves will be structured based on these three questions, and then the outcomes, of course, will then be captured according to addressing each of these three questions. Yunus, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I mean, of course, the role of the host is important in terms of the organization, and they should also be prepared for that. I know Bernie, as ICLEI Oceania, they are involved now in an event in New Zealand and Australia. And Solomon Island is one of the closest dates. I think this is the reason why he's also raising this issue. In the case of such countries, there may be some sequence of events that we can consider that we build on each other. But the basic expectation is that we should be able to give specific answer to this question. It could be a written summary, it could be a minutes, but it should address these questions that we have listed here. And Bernie, again, we will circulate these, both the presentation and the template and the guidance document, so that you can start to work on that as appropriate.
Thank you, Yunus. I see no other questions or hands raised. Yunus, are there any points that you would like to further zoom in on, or anything else that you might feel that you need further explanations?
No, in the list of participants, I see colleagues from European networks. On Thursday, there will be a ceremony of the Covenant of Mayors. I think there will be some certain discussions. Committee of the Regions is actively engaged in this process, and they are discussing which events could be the best. And we also have heard from NRG4ST, Network of Regional Governments, that they will host an event in Mexico that will be concluded or that will be included as part of these dialogues. So and other colleagues like Climate Change Association have already indicated their list of events. So we are open for hearing your input so that we can collectively complete this list or update and improve this list. And one thing maybe relevant to Europe is let's recall there is already a European NDC. It's the European Commission, European Union has listed it. But unlike Kyoto Protocol, each of the European nations do not necessarily have their nationally determined contributions as submitted. So the question of Europe is a bit interesting. Therefore, I think there is a huge role for the European networks to start the discussion at home. And of course, we are aware that the weaknesses of the leadership of Europe slightly weakening in some areas on the climate agenda. And we also know, for example, an average of the European Covenant of Mayors signatories reduction commitments even for 2020 is higher than the European Union target. So how to formulate that the European cities and regions reduction commitments or actions could strengthen the European regional target or step up in the national targets of Europe, this can be a very good opportunity to discuss at the Talanoa dialogues. And this global agenda is also a very key issue in Europe. We are hearing a number of countries starting to question their 2020 targets even. And obviously, we as cities and regions are always saying that we should not let this weakening these targets. We could step up to propose our contributions to the national governments that they should not be downscaling their commitments. And every European region and every European city and every European country should be much more actively engaged in this process. It's also a COP in the European soil, therefore there are more and more responsibilities. So especially for the European partners, we recommend you to be taking this issue very seriously, and we are open as ICLEI. Maybe you have seen ICLEI Europe already has been organizing a number of events. We will connect to this, but other European networks will also be expected to have their own events, and the European Committee of the Regions is actively involved. So this is also another open call for all our partners.
Thank you, Yunus. I would like to add my bit of the closing remarks for today's webinar by reiterating the importance of the Talanoa dialogue once again. As we are all aware, the pledge and check system of the Paris Agreement, which takes place at every 5 years. The first cycle of this will be laid out by the Talanoa dialogue. What we do this year will be the solid foundation to prepare for the first global stocktake in 2023. And what we discuss this year at each of the Talanoa dialogue sessions will be the input that will then go into the preparation of the next round of NDCs that are due by 2020. And our goal is quite clear, which is to raise the ambition of NDCs as much as possible to be closer to the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement. So I believe we are starting a very exciting journey this year, and ICLEI, I believe, on behalf of the LGMA constituency and the Global Task Force, is quite honored and pleased as well to be working together with all of you in this very important initiative. Yunus, are there any things that you would like to add as your closing remarks?
No, but there's one question from Bernie. Maybe you can. That
okay.
may be relevant to your part.
Okay, so
in the question pane, you can see that. Yep.
My my summary is based on the recording of Ambassador Khan's guidance. So the very next question is if there is a guaranteed seat, I suppose, for the local governments at as non-party stakeholder groups during the May session's Talanoa dialogues. No such information has been provided yet. I believe we are still waiting to hear further instructions as to how this actual selection process will be unfolded. I believe there was one intervention during the webinar, WRI webinar, that alluded to something along the lines of the registration process opening soon through the Talanoa website set up by the NFCCC. So, for example, I believe in the next coming days, I think more instructions will be released from the presidency side through the secretariat as to how to register ourselves for the Talanoa dialogues, or how this selection process for non-party stakeholders, representatives, will actually take place. So at the moment, I think we have to be on standby and watch out for that notice on the website.
But let's not forget, I mean, we are in daily contact with the Secretariat, and as a focal point role, ICLEI has been regularly providing formal and informal updates to the Secretariat. I think this question should be that, yes, there will be a constituency, but how many out of these 90 is subject to questions. But there's no question that we will not have any role. There will be our speakers, but is it 5 people, 10 people? We don't know this, and that's why what updates, as Jisun mentioned, is important. We should be preparing ourselves, and we should be expecting certain criteria or certain guidance, but for sure our voice will be heard, and that's why we should ask our why we're hoping that there will be regular updates through these webinars and share the outcomes. So that's something that supports Jisun's explanations.
Thank you, Yunus. We are on time to be closing this webinar, and I see no further questions or raised hand. So let me conclude our first webinar on Talanoa dialogues here. And as a reminder, as I said at the beginning of this webinar has been recorded, and the recording will be shared with all of you in the coming days. So thank you all for joining us today, and till our next webinar next month. We do this webinar at the third Wednesday of every month. So till the March webinar, we will work on preparing our updates for you, and then thank you all once again for joining us.